So it is an honor to present to you our commencement speaker this morning, Dr. Coretta Scott King.
Thank you, President Amacost, for your very kind words of introduction, and thank all of you for your very warm welcome. President Amacost, Chairman Wren, members of the administration and faculty, and most of all, members of the graduating class of 1993, parents, relatives, friends, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure and an honor to be with you today, and thank you for inviting me to be your commencement speaker. It is certainly good to return to Eckerd College after, I believe, about 10 years. I join you in congratulating all of our graduates who have worked so hard to get to this day. As members of the graduating class of 1996, you are the inheritors of a dazzling variety of opportunities and challenges. You're graduating at the dawning of a revolution in communications and information technology. It has been said, and rightly so, that information is power, and no generation in history has had so much access to information as the class of 1996. Whether you choose to continue your education in graduate school or enter the workforce, the great libraries and databases of the world are no longer distant resources available only to a select few. Increasingly, they are as close as the keyboard of a personal computer. What will you do with all of this information? How will you use it to create a better world? These are some of the questions I hope you will be asking at the time of this transition in your lives. It is important to empower yourselves for the workplace of the new century. A good career is a critical part of personal fulfillment. Yet, as you build your career skills, you are also challenged to a higher calling, the call to serve humanity. Every generation has to answer this call in its own way. Let me take you back to a time not so long ago when another generation accepted this challenge and ignited a social movement that revolutionized America. At that time, African Americans were forced to suffer a host of indignities and humiliation on a daily basis. We could not eat in the same section of restaurants as our white brothers and sisters. And as a child, I can remember having to go with other black children to the back door of a local ice cream store where we would get whatever flavor remained after the white children placed their orders in the front of the store. I can remember having to sit in the balcony of the local movie theater because African Americans children were not allowed to sit in the better seats of the first level. We could not stay in the white hotels, and at that time there were almost no black hotels, and our children were forced to attend separate schools that, like most of the amenities white children took for granted. We were forced to live in segregated communities with few of the city services that were provided for white citizens. Signs that said white and colored constantly assaulted our dignity. We were denied decent wages and employment opportunities. We almost never got justice in the courts. White racists brutalized, intimidated, and murdered African American people with impunity. All manner of violence and discriminatory devices were deployed to prevent us from exercising our constitutional right to vote. Then, like a lightning bolt against this dark sky of racial oppression, on May 17, 1954, the U.S. Supreme Court issued the historic decision in Brown versus Board of Education, and Topeka, a black student named Linda Brown had been denied admittance to a predominantly white public school in Topeka, Kansas, and was told she had to go to a predominantly black school. Her father joined in a lawsuit arguing that she had every right to attend the public school in her community. The court ruled in their favor and said that racially segregated schools were inherently unequal and illegal. I remember as an almost electric surge of hope I felt when I heard the news about the Brown decision. I was in Boston preparing to graduate from the New England Conservatory of Music, where I went for graduate studies after Antioch. My husband later would write that this ruling, and I quote, came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of enforced segregation, end of quote. He continued to say that that would transform the fatigue of despair into the buoyancy of hope. The Brown decision was the prelude to a revolution, the nonviolent revolution known as the American Civil Rights Movement. It led to new educational opportunities for millions of black children, opportunities that they would not have gotten had the decision gone the other way. When the Brown decision was issued in 1954, just 14% of blacks graduated from high school, compared to about 80% today. In 1954, 2 4/10% of African Americans had college degrees, compared to 17% today. As a result of the Brown decision, no public school in America can legally deny students admission because they are black. Yet, with few exceptions, de facto school segregation as a result of segregated neighborhoods remain a nagging reality across the nation. This is regrettable because young people have so much to gain from interracial schooling. More and more, the future belongs to those who have experience, sensitivity, and skills in intercultural cooperation. In the months after the Brown decision, my husband and I moved from Boston, where we had completed our graduate studies, to Montgomery, Alabama, where he had accepted a pastorate at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. I came down to join him in July of 1954. A year and a half later, in that same city, Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a city bus to a white man. Shortly afterwards, my husband was propelled to the forefront of the leadership of the Montgomery bus boycott, and our lives became dedicated to the American Civil Rights Movement. The bus boycott lasted 381 days, and it led directly to another decision by the U.S. Supreme Court, this time affirming a federal district court ruling that segregation on interstate transportation facilities was illegal. This was a great victory, not only for African Americans, but also for a strategy of nonviolent resistance. The Civil Rights Movement went on to use the strategy and tactics of nonviolence pioneered by Martin Luther King Jr. to achieve a series of historic victories against racial injustice in America. In the less than 13 years of the nonviolent civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King Jr., from 1955 to 1968, African Americans achieved more freedom and equality than the previous 4 centuries had produced. We were able to persuade the Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that desegregated public accommodations, including hotels, parks, and other recreational facilities, restaurants and schools and other public facilities. The Selma, Alabama Voting Rights Campaign led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965, which made possible a tremendous increase in black elected officials around the nation. When the civil rights movement started back in 1955, there were less than 100 African American office holders in the entire nation. Today, there are more than 8,000 because of this legislation. Clearly, we have come a long way since the days of the movement, but we still have a long way to go before we can say that we have achieved equality in America. Our more than 8,000 elected officials are less than 2% of all elected officials in the nation, even though African Americans are about 12% of the population. In the arena of economic progress, the unemployment rate for black workers is more than double the rate for white workers. Only 2 African Americans had a Fortune 500 corporation. Racial discrimination remains a continuing fact of life in America. Regrettably, racial polarization and conflict is also a persistent pathology of our society. And today, we are witnessing an all-out effort to destroy affirmative action in Congress and many other states. Some of the critics of affirmative action have even invoked Martin Luther King Jr. and his name in their arguments. The governor of Louisiana recently announced his intention to eliminate state set-aside programs and cited Martin Luther King Jr. as being in agreement with his position. My husband, in fact, strongly supported what he called the preferential employment of the disadvantaged. In 1965, he wrote, and I quote, "Within common law, we have ample precedents for special compensatory programs. American Indians are still being paid for land in a settlement manner. Is not 2 centuries of labor which helped build this country as a real commodity? America adopted a policy of special treatment for her millions of veterans after the war, a program which cost far more than a policy of preferential treatment would cost today," end of quote. To abandon affirmative action is to say there is nothing more to be done about discrimination. If we allow this to happen, we will reap a bitter whirlwind of ever-deepening racial polarization and conflict. Somehow, America has to do better. We can't create the interracial unity needed to create vibrant, thriving communities without a sense of trust and fairness between diverse groups. This can't happen without a good faith effort to promote sharing of business, employment, and educational opportunities. That's what affirmative action is all about. It is a formidable challenge to create a cooperative, thriving, multicultural democracy which celebrates both unity and diversity. But if it can be done, it must be done in America. This was the central challenge posed by the American Civil Rights Movement. Winning the struggle against racism is critical for the future of America, but it is not the only crisis we face in charting the nation's future. We must also accept the challenge to create a nonviolent society. We've got to get proactive about stopping violence. Being proactive to stop violence means more than building new prisons or putting more police on the streets. Being proactive means we have to get some sensible controls on the manufacture and sale of handguns and other deadly weapons. It means boycotts if necessary to convince corporations to stop sponsoring entertainment that glorifies violence. Being proactive means speaking out against spouse and child abuse in your neighborhood. Being proactive means creating more job training opportunities and educational assistance so that the young people of the ghettos and barrios and depressed communities of America can have some real hope for a better future. It means voicing your opposition to all forms of bigotry, including racism, sexism, homophobia, and xenophobia. You, the young people, who have so much influence in shaping the culture of this nation, are the key to creating a nonviolent society. Your leadership is desperately needed to create a culture of nonviolence, a culture that encourages artists whose work promotes human understanding, tolerance, social justice, interracial brother and sisterhood, and peace. College students have a critical leadership role to play in carrying forward the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. Young people like you have always provided leadership on the cutting edge. Throughout history, students and young people have filled the front ranks of social change movements in America and around the world. One of the clearest remaining images of my college years is a statue on the campus of my alma mater, Antioch University now. Most colleges have a statue somewhere, but my guess is that a few of them hold much meaning for students. But the statue at Antioch was a little different. The subject of the statue was the great educator Horace Mann, who was the founding president of Antioch. What stays in my mind after all these years is the challenge that was inscribed on the base of that statue. The words on the inscription, which came from Horace Mann's speech to the first graduating class in the late 1850s, said, "Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity." I think this challenge must have affected a lot of Antioch students over the years, because Antioch, like Eckerd College, has produced more than its share of social activists and leaders of humanitarian causes. Be ashamed to die until you've won some victory for humanity is a powerful message, because it speaks to a compelling challenge for all people. God didn't put us here to pursue personal gratification and ignore those who have been denied opportunities for a good life. No, instead we are called to lift up the forgotten, the disadvantaged and disinherited, who have been denied the blessings of education and opportunity. 35 years ago, another generation of students, inspired by Martin Luther King Jr., answered this question by rising up to lead a nonviolent movement that revolutionized American society. They set an energetic tone of courage and commitment, which compelled a vibrant spirit of social change. They were there in Birmingham and Montgomery and Selma and all of the campaigns of the civil rights movement. Students provided decisive leadership for ending the Vietnam War. Now we need you to lead us once again to a higher and more noble destiny. So I want to appeal to you today to rise up and lead a new revolution for social change. And I call you to reject the easy road of apathy and indifference. Reject materialism and drug abuse, and lead your generation to a better America. In this critical election year, it is vitally important that you exercise your right to vote. My husband urged students and young people to make politics a crusade. He believed that we cannot move America forward unless young people pick up the ballot and use the power. So I urge you in the name of Martin Luther King Jr. to get yourselves registered, educated on the issues, and then get yourself and your peers to the polls on Election Day. Don't let anyone tell you there's nothing important to vote for. But if you are happy with the way things are, there's no point in your voting. If you think the members of Congress who voted to ease restrictions on assault weapons did the right thing, don't bother voting, and they will be back next year to put more deadly weapons on the streets of your community. If you like the fact that the federal government spends 50 times as much money on military weapons as it does on education, just stay at home and nothing will change. If you're happy with the tuition cost of a college education, if you think it's okay that 40 million of your fellow citizens have no health insurance, or if you have no problem with what is happening to the trees and rivers and air and soil on our planet, then there's no good reason for you to vote. But if you care about these things, and I think you do, because that is what they teach you here at Eckerd, then for the sake of humanity, for the sake of our precious earth, you must use the power that so many have bled and sacrificed for, and cast your ballot for a more just nation and a better world. This is the challenge you must accept, for history is calling your generation to pick up the torch of freedom and lead America toward another great revolution. Yours is the generation that has been chosen to stop the escalating spiral of military spending that is draining the world's economic resources. Your generation has been anointed to put an end to poverty and racism, to restore the environment and secure human rights for the people of our world. No matter what your major or career path you choose, commit yourself to the worldwide struggle against poverty and racism and violence. It will make you a more fulfilled person. It will make America a greater nation and create a better world for all humankind. I hope you will join with me in sharing Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream of a nation and world united in justice, equality, and peace. In this dream, the streets of America are no longer haunted by thousands of hungry and homeless families because we have a national commitment to employment and decent housing for all of our citizens. We dream of a nation where young families can afford to buy a home, a nation that makes it possible for family farmers to survive and prosper. Fulfilling the dream means that all Americans have access to a system of national health care, and medical research is a higher priority than weapons research. It means that our only wars are against AIDS and cancer, heart disease, and other debilitating illnesses. Fulfilling the dream means that there are no inferior and overcrowded public schools, because education is a leading priority of our national life. It means that no young person is denied a chance for a college education because of the lack of financial resources. Granted, fulfilling this dream will be an expensive undertaking. Granted, we face a difficult struggle to enact a legislative and policy agenda that can make the dream a reality. But now is not the time for hesitation. Now is not the time for uncertainty. Now is not the time for indecision. But now is the time to move forward in a unified, nonviolent coalition to fulfill the promise of democracy. Now is the time to make real the dreams of freedom and justice. And now is the time to stand up for justice, for peace, and for world brotherhood and sisterhood. Thank you, and God bless you.